Indonesians, passively compliant, the Japanese attempted to superimpose their own way of life upon the culture of the islanders, beginning with the training of the young. Resentment among the natives soon began rising, as thousands of them were forced into service in a Japanese-trained army, or pressed into slave labor. When the Indonesians found themselves being treated like conquered enemies, when Japanese seizure of their rice crops brought them to destitution and starvation, resentment rose to bitter hatred. In 1945, final defeat came to the Japanese. 3 days after the war's end, a committee of national leaders proclaimed the independence of the Republic of Indonesia, with Sukarno as president. Thus, on their own initiative, seizing the freedom promised 3 years earlier by the Dutch. With the Japanese defeated and no allied forces at hand to take over in their place, nationalist feeling swept the people of Indonesia. The Indonesian Republic was 6 weeks old before the first allied forces returned to the Indies, and some 2,000 British troops, with a contingent of Dutch, landed at Batavia. But by that time, the nationalist government had grasped the opportunity to entrench itself in Java and Sumatra, and Republican extremists had fanned into flame the spirit of nationalism. Within a short time, the British, later relieved by Dutch forces, found themselves involved in fierce guerrilla warfare with desperate and determined nationalists. The fullest fury of the Indonesians was directed against their old rulers, the Dutch, many of whom returned from concentration camps to find themselves facing new ordeals. Other internees were released from their camps only after months of terror, during which they had been held as hostages by the Indonesians. Over a year and a half of fighting elapsed before the signing of the Linggajati Agreement interrupted hostilities. Negotiated by such able and fair-minded men as Premier Syahrir of Indonesia and Acting Governor Van Mook of the Indies, the agreement provided for the establishment by 1949 of Indonesia, Borneo, and East Indonesia as separate republics, comprising the United States of Indonesia, to be co-equal partners in union with the Netherlands. The separate republics of Borneo and East Indonesia were largely creations of the Dutch government, which had encouraged their political independence with the understanding that they would remain under the crown in the proposed Netherlands-Indonesian Union. This political division of territory still left the Dutch with considerable influence over large areas of the Indies. In the Republic of Indonesia, Dutch troops stood fast on the lines of demarcation fixed by the Linggajati Agreement. But tension mounted as each side accused the other of refusing to live up to the loosely drawn and variously interpreted pact. Claiming complete failure of the Republicans to meet their obligations, the Dutch moved out from their agreed positions into Indonesian territory and launched a large-scale offensive. Burned enormous and valuable stockpiles of crude rubber and other commodities. They spared not even their own people, for by destroying the irrigation dams upon which much of the agriculture of the islands depended, they ruined native crops and brought destitution once more to hundreds of thousands. With bitter warfare deepening the hatred between Indonesians and Dutch, and making any rational settlement of their differences less and less likely, the first move to end the impasse came from outside. The Security Council of the United Nations issued the sternest resolution in its history, calling upon both sides to cease fire immediately and compose their differences by negotiation. But between the antagonists, resentment had become too intense, and distrust of one another too deep, even on the part of leaders like Acting Governor General Van Mook, inclined to moderation.
What is the basic trouble between the Dutch and the Indonesian Republic?
Our trouble is not with the Republic, it is with this present self-appointed Republican government. It is unable to provide anything like a regular administration.
And among reasonable men in the opposite camp, like Indonesia's Tambu, the feeling of distrust was equally strong.
The Republic of Indonesia has been functioning with an independent government for over 2 years, yet the Dutch are trying to reimpose colonial rule.
Republican leaders say they can't trust your government on the independence question.
Our promises of independence were made by a large majority of a freely elected Dutch parliament. We have, I think, a good record of doing what we undertake to do.
The path of Dutch colonial history is strewn with broken promises. In 1918, they promised us internal autonomy. That promise was not kept. In 1942, the Dutch Queen promised us voluntary cooperation between Holland and Indonesia on an equal basis. That promise wasn't kept. In October 1946, we signed a truce agreement with the Dutch. They broke that agreement too.
The Dutch charge that the Indonesian Republic has not carried out the promises of the Linggadjati Agreement.
We Indonesians have kept every promise. We wanted to submit our differences with the Dutch to arbitration, as called for by the Linggadjati Agreement. But the Dutch repeatedly refused our requests, tore up the Linggadjati Agreement, and 1 hour later launched a full-scale attack on us.
Our action was taken to end the anarchy into which the Republican Revolution was developing.
In Holland, where the government is seeking a way to terminate strife in Indonesia, the Dutch are facing one historic fact. In Asia today, the world is witnessing the end of white domination over Asiatic peoples. But far from clear are the effects of this fact on the future of the commercial enterprises which have grown rich and powerful through trade with the Indies, enterprises which form a substantial part of the Dutch economy. Upon this trade, which has flourished for over 300 years, still depends in large part Holland's position as a prosperous and progressive nation, and the enviable standard of living its people have traditionally enjoyed. Today, the Dutch are confident that through the sober industry which has carried them so far toward recovery, they can regain a measure of their old prosperity. But they are nonetheless deeply concerned about the future that will be theirs if there should come to an end the empire which has made the Netherlands rich, respected, and great. Time marches on.